Hope you're doing well. Appreciate those of you who've been interested in my situation with the finger. The very fact you can see the end is a good sign that, I kid about a lot of things, find humor in a lot of stuff, but I sure wanted to keep the end of my finger if at all possible. But everything went fine Thursday. They got the 2 cuttings, they got everything, and it did require skin graft. And I couldn't help but think as I was on the table, well, they had to take a big piece up here, I say big, piece right in here in my chest, And I thought, well, I got marks here. I couldn't help but think of Frankenstein and the monster. And then they had this thing I was telling Charlie and Gene and Jonathan about it. They had what kind of grounding pad. So when they cauterize, I couldn't help but think Frankenstein's monster, and it's alive. It's alive. But anyway, thankful that everything went fine, and I honestly, I'm just thankful for medical science and the advances we've made. I asked the doctor who did this, I said, if 120, 30 years ago, and just let it happen, let it go, what would have happened? He said, well, it would have gotten on into your bone, then it would have gotten into your lymph nodes, manifested it somewhere else, and it would have killed you. So I'm thankful that we have medicine to the degree we do. Lee's not well today, and that explains her absence. Appreciate the prayers for her and for me as well. In our readings this morning, we from the 11th, or the 12th rather, which was Thursday, through last night, the 14th, we have Genesis 35 through Genesis 42, 35 through 42. We're going to go pretty quickly. In these passages of Genesis, in 35, we have Jacob, at least, his sons, Simeon and Levi, just got through doing what in Shechem? In killing a bunch of the Shechemites that they had pretended could marry Dinah and others. And so in 35, Jacob's going to have to leave. And what's interesting in verse 2, he tells his family to put away what? The foreign gods. Yeah, there was still, even though they worshiped the Lord, there was still some misunderstanding concerning the unique nature of only one God. The promises are mentioned, the nation and the land in verse 11 and 12. And then we have a couple of deaths. Rebecca's nurse, Deborah, dies down in verse 8. So who else dies? Down in verse 22. No, I'm sorry, not 22. Rachel. Rachel dies. And she has in childbirth what son? Benjamin. Name is, Rachel wants it to be Benoni, son of my sorrow. And Jacob renames him Benjamin, son of my right hand. And then we have a little incident in 22 where it's mentioned that Reuben lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard it. Just a small incident that occurred, yet it will be significant. We'll find in chapter 49 that Reuben was actually the firstborn, and by that should have received the right of what? Right of primogeniture, right of the firstborn. But it didn't go to him because of this very thing. And then Simeon and Levi were men of violence. That's mentioned in chapter 49 in the promise. And so the messianic seed promise went through Judah. But actually the right of primogeniture didn't go through any of those. It went through Joseph, and Joseph got a double portion basically by Jacob blessing Ephraim and Manasseh, right. And so that was the double portion that he received. And all that's a part of chapter 49. First Chronicles 5 verse 2 shows the significance of this, that the birthright passed from him. He did not have that. Then we have the death of Isaac. How old is Isaac when he dies in verse 28? 180, right. 175 for Abraham, 180 for Isaac. Who knows Jacob's age at death? 137. Good, fair. Joseph was how old in the end of Genesis 50 when he died? 110, yeah, 110. Okay, real quickly, in 36, whose genealogies do we have? Esau's, and one of the points made here is that through Esau came kings and a nation just like God had originally promised. In 37, we really begin the story of whom? Joseph. Joseph, while Jacob won't die until at the end of Genesis, we really have the story. Joseph becomes the main character, and it will be through Joseph that the children of Israel eventually go down into the land of Goshen in Egypt and develop as a what? As a nation. It'll be through him. So in 37, his brothers sell him, and he's brought down into Egypt. A great story on the providence of God. Then 38 is similar to 34 in the sense that it shows the wickedness of that area. Judah has relations with his daughter-in-law, whose name was Tamar. Tamar feigned herself as a prostitute, and then Jacob goes into her, and then she conceives and has twins. Who are they? Perez and Zerah. And through whom does Jesus come? Perez. Good. 39, Joseph is in whose house? Potiphar's. And who lies about Joseph? That's right, Potiphar's wife, and that ends up in Joseph being put in prison, where in chapter 40, he's able to interpret two men's dreams, the butler and the baker. One is killed. Who is he? The baker. One is restored, the butler. And then in the process of time, Pharaoh has dreams, as we see in 41. And who is reminded of someone who can interpret dreams? The butler. And so he tells Pharaoh about that, and Pharaoh gets Joseph. And Joseph then, as the end of the chapter shows, is raised really to second in command behind Pharaoh, and makes provisions for the famine that was coming. We find out some things about ages as well. Joseph is given a wife, Asenath, down in verse 45 of chapter 41. And we find a couple of sons born, and Brother Gene mentioned them a while ago. What are their names? Manasseh and Ephraim. And it's interesting that both of the names of those men, or the boys that were born, both of them have reference to the fact that Joseph was thinking about what?
Promised land.
The promised land, what had happened to him in times before. Manasseh means making to forget. He's been made to forget the problems that had gone on. And Ephraim, the idea is to be fruitful. God has allowed him to be fruitful in the land where he was. In the last chapter, in 42, we find the beginning of some tests that Joseph performs on whom? On his own brothers, to see if there had been any change from the time that all this happens. There were how many years of plenty? 7. How many years of famine? 7. What year was it when these brothers began to go down?
Second year.
The second year of the famine. So you think the seven years that Joseph has been preparing, and so that makes it 9 years. And so you've got Joseph at about 39 years of age during the time he does this, and when he begins to test his brothers. All right, all of this is going. You don't see it here, but I'm always impressed when we think about larger portions of Scripture and how they fit to the rest of the Bible story. That all of this is leading to Israel going into Egypt, becoming the great nation, and giving time. Remember back in chapter 15 when God told Abraham, he said, your descendants are going to go into a land that's not theirs and will gain much possessions and will come out with great substance. For the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full. And so while they were developing as a nation down in Egypt, as we'll see, back up here in Canaan, it was just getting worse and worse and worse. The Canaanite tribes were going downhill even more so. And so by the time that all this happens, they'll be ripe for destruction, ripe for all that. So you see the providence of God, the timing of God, all of that working out perfectly. Comment, question? All right, let's turn in our Bibles and also our notebooks to the 7th chapter of Matthew. And we'll come to this and Sermon on the Mount and cover some ground this morning. All right, we want to remember the gospel of the kingdom Jesus has been preaching involved a number of things, and he really articulates a number of these things in the 7th chapter, well, 5th, 6th, and 7th chapters of Matthew. Without looking, what chapter in Luke gives you the Luke's account of the same? Luke chapter 6. Good. We'll come back to that, Lord willing, in just a moment. All right, so as we've been going through Matthew, the gospel, the kingdom of heaven is at hand, Matthew 3:2, 4:17, 4:23, the gospel of the kingdom was preached throughout all Galilee. And now here's the articulation of what it means, the nature of kingdom righteousness. And so the Beatitudes, similitudes, Jesus' relation to the law, and then in 21 through 48, the various activities. Don't murder versus don't be angry. Don't commit adultery versus don't lust. You can divorce but give a certificate versus divorce only for fornication. Don't swear falsely versus don't swear at all. An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth versus simply don't retaliate. Overcome evil with good. Love your neighbor, hate your enemy, but I say, love even your enemies. All right, and then 6:1 through 18, he goes from the actions and attitudes of doing right, righteousness that exceeds what? Scribes and Pharisees, to making sure not only our actions and behavior, but our motives are right. And what 3 areas does he deal in 1 through 18? In order. 1 through 5? I'm sorry, 1 through 4? Alms. Benevolence. 5 through 15? Prayer. And then the last one? Fasting. 16 through 18. And then the last part is basically what you need to do is lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And don't even worry about what? The necessities of life, because what? God's going to take care of those. But your main concern is to seek first God's kingdom, and all these, even the necessities will be what? They'll be added to you. So not everybody, though, may get it like you do. And so we need to be like God is. We need to not to judge how? Harshly. That's right. Harshly, censoriously. Judge not that you be not judged. Because if that's the kind of judgment that you deal with people, what? Yes, with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. And what measure you meet, it shall be met out to you. And then don't be a hypocrite where you're more concerned about the speck that is in your brother's eye, and you're not concerned about the mote, the log, the beam in your own. You hypocrite. Cast this out first, and then you'll see plainly. Then verse 6, he says, there are just some people who will not receive it. Give not that which is holy to dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest haply they turn and rend you. But God does offer the kingdom to everybody who does what 3 things? Asks, seeks, and knocks, and it shall be given them. And then the comparison is made to a father who has a son, and the son asks for a loaf. He doesn't tantalize him by saying, well, here's a stone. Or asks for a fish, and he gives him a serpent. If you, in comparison to God, you being evil, know how to give good things to your children, how much more shall the Father in heaven give you what is best, what is good? And so then we come down to verse 12, which is often known as the golden rule. All right, here's where we've been. And in our sections of the sermon in chapter 7, the caveat or the balances to the earlier teaching. And we talked about the connection there. We talked the other day about verse 6. And then in 7 through 11, it's not obtained by heroic endeavors, some type of meritorious achievement, but genuinely seeking. And I wanted to say a little bit more about that. We talked a little bit about this. God is mindful of genuine, diligent seekers, the present tense, the continuous action. Ask and it shall be given you. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. There's the progression of the ideas. And we looked at just a few of these. Well, this is where we ended Wednesday night. This has always been the case, as the hart or the deer pants after the water brook, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. And we mentioned Simeon and Anna, the Samaritans, how it's Jesus' idea of what it means to seek first is a person finds the treasure hidden in the field or the pearl of great price. He goes and sells how much? All that he has, that he might purchase that field or that pearl. And then in the examples of conversion, the people who are converted are always those who either were seeking and they found, like the Ethiopian. Here, what does Isaiah really mean? When Philip comes up to him, he says, do you understand what you're reading? Because he was reading aloud. He said, how can I except someone should guide me? So he did what? He besought Philip to join him, ask, seek, knock. You see that so beautifully represented in those, so there's that desire on the part of a person to know more about God, know who God is. And then in the 10th chapter, Cornelius is the same way. He called together his whole house. We are all here together in the sight of God, recognizing the reverent nature of it, to hear all things whatsoever God has commanded you. Isn't that wonderful when you find somebody, you go to a house and somebody says, I'm here for you. You just tell me everything I need to know. Ooh, that is so wonderful when you find people like that. But it's not just in becoming Christians, it's continuing on. We quoted that, I think, at the end. I think it was at the end. Yes. It was at the end of class. 1 Corinthians 15:58. You quote it with me. Be ye therefore steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know your labor is not in vain in the Lord. So that's the idea of even the overflowing, bubbling over, doing, always wanting to know more. And I've got several things on this I wanted to continue on with you. God will favor, note the progression, we did that. And God will favorably answer our request. Ask and it shall be received. Knock. He will answer favorably in respect to our desire to be saved. All of those examples of conversion. Don't y'all know people? I know I do, and I think you do too. People that you're around, and there's just that simple, heartfelt desire to know God, to do His will. No hidden agenda. That's what the Lord wants. And our desire to learn more of His will. Y'all quote that. Y'all heard me quote that enough. If any man willeth to do His will, he shall know of the teaching, whether I speak from myself or some other, or from the Father. And then our desires and prayers that correspond to His will. It's back in 6:14 and 15, just a page over in mine, earlier in the sermon. If you forgive not men their trespasses, For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you don't forgive them, what? Right. But there's the, and then actually in verse, back in 10, thy will be done as on earth as in heaven. That's the attitude that we ought to have. James 1, 6 and 7, if we ask in wisdom, nothing doubting. Let's see. He starts off by saying, but if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given to him. But let him ask in faith, nothing doubting. For he that doubts is like the what? Surge of the sea, driven the waves of the sea, driven by the winds and tossed. Let not that man think he shall receive anything of the Lord. A double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. But if we have confidence and we're asking to, and in the sense of James 1, he starts off by saying, count it all joy when you fall into manifold what? Temptations or trials. Okay. And then the next paragraph, but if any man lacks wisdom. So he talks about the nature of trials, outward trials, and how they can perfect our faith. And then the very next paragraph, but if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask, wisdom in what respect? Contextually, it would be to determine how trials can help us grow, how the pitfalls in life and difficulties we've undergone can help us to do better. And so I know when something comes, that's such a terribly wonderful lesson for us. Instead of blaming God when difficulties come our way, I don't think God's fair with me, or what. Rather, what we ought to say is, I know, things happen in life. I can learn from this. Father, help me to see what I need to learn. It could be patience. It could be careful in various areas of life. It could be a number of things. But ask, and when I ask with that view in mind, God promises what? Back in Matthew 7:7. Ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and you'll find. So our desires and prayers that correspond to His will would certainly be a part of this. In 1 John 5:14, if we ask anything according to His will, He hears us. So there's several areas. I don't think when you come back to ask and it shall seek, I don't think it's just prayer. And I don't think it's just in becoming a Christian, learning what to do to be saved. I think it includes all of those things, but I think it's more of the whole gamut of life. Brother Gene, you want to say something like?
I don't think anybody ought to ever assume because something bad happens it came from God. If you learn any lesson from Job,
yes,
Job was a good fellow.
Yes.
Bad things happened to him, and God didn't say, this is why it happened, Job.
Yeah.
But it would not have happened to him if God had known that he would be able to stand it.
Exactly. Because God does not allow.
The devil was the issue point of the difficulties in Job's life. Exactly.
Devil was responsible. In fact, he identified there in the first couple of chapters. That's exactly. And Paul said concerning his thorn in the flesh, it was a messenger of Satan to buff him. You had your hand up, I thought.
I did. That's seek. You were we were along the same thought line there. It's that whole gamut that when you seek and you understand, you want to seek more.
Yeah.
So it's always. You're always seeking.
Yeah. That's a snowball effect.
Yes,
almost.
very much.
I think that's right.
And I think anybody that's been a Christian for a while in some age, I'll say, you realize when you said something that you shouldn't have said, and you don't blame the result of that on God.
Right.
Keep your mouth shut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. That's a great point. Turn real quickly to 1 Peter 4. What Brother Gene alluded to reminds me of a passage in. It's toward the end of the chapter. I'm looking at verse 13. If you read verse 13 with me and following, Who is he who will harm you if you be zealous of that which is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, blessed are you. And fear not their fear, neither be troubled, but sanctify in your hearts Christ is Lord, being ready always to give answer to everyone who asks you a reason concerning the hope that is within you, yet with meekness and fear, having a good conscience, that wherein you're spoken against, they may be put to shame who revile your good manner of life. For it is better, if the will of God should so will, that you suffer for well-doing than for evil-doing, which indicates people can suffer for what? For both evil as well as good. Sometimes we make mistakes and we suffer for it. And so, but back on Matthew 7, the idea is, okay, I've been giving you all of these instructions, and be careful with other people. Don't judge them harshly. And recognize there'll be some people who just don't want it at all. But the kingdom is indeed, it's obtainable, it's doable. It's very doable. But you have to ask, you have to seek it with all your heart. With my whole heart have I sought thee. Oh, let me not wander from thy commandments. Psalm 119, verse 10. So there's no answer for those who do not diligently seek it. There's none left. And I was thinking about something earlier this morning. When a person turns from the Lord, and what I mean by that, they may be learning more and then they decide they'll turn against it. Or they've learned, they obey the gospel, then they turn away. When a person turns away and you're a part of trying to restore or trying to lead them to the Lord, it is not altogether your fault or mine. I think some of us have kind of beat ourselves up over that. So what did I say wrong? Was my attitude wrong? Did I use the wrong words? We may have. But ultimately, who's responsible for a person either going to the Lord or going away from the Lord? Ultimately, that person. That person has to have the attitude of seeking and doing. I was impressed with a fellow when we lived down in Waycross, Georgia. There was a fellow who lived over in the Brunswick area, Jessup, and he was going there. A lot of pulpwood industry is large in that area, and he would ride in a pickup truck. This fellow would ride in a pickup truck with a fellow who was a member of the church and another one who was nothing religiously. And he told me, he said, my buddy who carried me, he was a member of the church. And he cursed like a sailor, but he told me what I needed to do to be saved. And he said, when I look back at it, he was wrong and his attitude was wrong, but he did have that kernel, he didn't use the word kernel, but he had that, he had that truth with him. And he said, that's what I was looking for. And he latched on to it. And regardless of the cursing, profanity, and wrong attitudes of the person who told me, his desire was so good, so strong, that he was able to sift through all of that and get the truth out of it, and he obeyed the gospel and was faithful, and the other guy wasn't. That tells you that, yes, our behavior has an influence. It can help people, it can hurt people. And our words have influence. They can help or they can hurt. But ultimately, a person who's going to heaven is based on his own or her own desire to please God, ask, seek, and knock. So when a person turns from the Lord, it is not altogether your fault or mine. We can help, we can hurt, but ultimately, his or her seeking must be there. And think about it. Jesus always said the right thing. He always did the right thing. And guess what? Did everybody follow Jesus even during it? No. In John the 6th chapter, when Jesus said, except you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life. What in the world is he talking about? And it was in that context that John says, upon this saying, many of his disciples walked no more with him. And Jesus looked at the 12 and said, remember, would you also go away? And Peter said, Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life. So what Jesus had to say turned off a lot of people. And so I'm not saying that we just need to be careless of our words. I'm not saying that at all, because, people need to be helped and not hindered. And we will be held responsible for how we help or hinder someone. But ultimately, it's not up to us. Which reminds me of another passage. You're probably thinking with me. 1 Corinthians 3. I planted, Apollos watered, but it's God who gives the increase.
Bill, there's also an application that so many parents carry shame because their child is not a Christian. But as a parent, if you have done and all that you can and teach them, just like you said, it's ultimately their choice.
It's ultimately theirs, yeah. And it can give us great joy or be great heartaches, but we do. And I really don't know of any of us who've said, well, I was just the perfect parent. I certainly have not made that. But you do the best you can at the time that you have. And you pray for the best, you hope for encourage the best. But ultimately, you're right.
And most of us, we were kids raising kids.
Yeah.
So you learn and you make mistakes. But if you show them the way to go and they choose not to do that, that's their choice.
Yeah.
And we can't blame ourselves for it.
Yeah, when you get in your 60s, and I know some of you in 70s, 80s, you think, boy, what better parent I would have been in my 20s and 30s, if I had the understanding I do in my later years. But you still do the best you can with what you have, as I know what you're talking about. Okay.
We don't need to forget that God's word, Hebrews for word, quick and powerful.
Yes. It's the word that does it.
Yes.
And how many parents have you known who really didn't put the Lord first? They didn't do a lot of things they should have done, and the children are just, really stalwart. It goes both ways. Sometimes people use the passage in Proverbs 22, verse 6. Solomon said, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And I know people have said, well, that if a child turns out wrong and reared by a Christian parent, that means they just didn't train him right. There's several things about that proverb. It's first of all a proverb, and a proverb is a what? A general truth. That's one way of looking at it. But in the American Standard, Kyle and Dalitz does some of that. Train up a child according to his inclination in the way he will go. And it's like a lot of the proverbs are not necessarily spiritual in the sense they're dealing primarily. They're of a general nature, and that proverb can be explained along the lines that if you train a child and gear him toward the inclinations he already has, and when he's older, he will continue well in that. Somebody's an artist, can draw real well, and you feed that. Or somebody is more mechanically inclined, and you encourage them along math and physics, and you know what I'm saying? Music, whatever it is, that's an explanation. At least Kyle makes a pretty strong argument for that. Okay, we got a little bit off this, didn't we? But that's all right. Next one here. Okay. Before we go in, any other comment on Matthew 7 through 11? Anybody? Yes, ma'am, Paula.
When you talk about asking, seeking, and everything, God's going to do it in His time, not your time.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be the answer you want right then, but you may get it later in life. One of my favorite scriptures is Psalms 135. It says, I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in His word I do hope. And that has given me more help for me, knowing if I ask, it might not be right then, but I know He's got it somewhere down the line.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point to help us, that sometimes we want things right now, and sometimes we might want what is not in our best interest in the long run. We
He says
just,
he's a giver of all good gifts too, so
Exactly.
something that we're looking for.
yeah, you'll notice there in verse 11 of 7, if ye then being evil, that again, that's in comparison to God. You know it is, because except your righteousness exceed the right. I mean, he's been talking about kingdom righteousness. He's not saying you're really an evil person. No, it's evil in comparison to how great and righteous God is. If you then, in the comparison, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, you know what is in their best interest, and you try to help them, how much more, there's the reasoning from the lesser to the greater, how much more shall your Father who is in heaven give good things to them that ask him? I couldn't help but think, we've used this illustration numerous times, but Paul in Romans 1, I think is about 10, 11, says, for I long to see you, that I may impart unto you some spiritual gift to the end you be established. Paul wanted to go to the Romans for a good reason. He wanted to confirm I hesitate to use the word affirm, but confirm and bolster their faith. And he wanted to see them. Well, about 5 years after he wrote that letter, guess what? He saw them with an armed escort, ship, all expenses paid, on a ship bound for Rome. Spent a little time in Malta, he wintered in Malta, we might say, in the Riviera. But based on the shipwreck, but he finally got there, and then so much good was done. And then you read Philippians, and how much good, he just overflowing with joy and the good that was done, and how brethren had been emboldened to speak the word of God without fear, and those of Caesar's household salute you. All those good things that were happening, that probably would not have happened had Paul gone on a free journey, without being right where he was kept. Sometimes you don't realize, I don't, and I know all of us don't. Sometimes you're in a situation that you think, I really wish I weren't here. I really wish I didn't have to deal with this. I really wish this, had something. And who knows but the influence that you have, that you're bringing to bear on certain ones there, will pay rich dividends in years to come that you not even thought about. Dad used to tell a story that Brother Lewis would tell sometimes, that I guess I've told you all. Gene and Janet probably remember it. Sister Violet probably remembers it. But Brother Lewis would tell a story along these lines, that you don't know what good you're doing at the time. That he held a tent meeting in Childersburg years ago. I guess it was in the 30s. And it was a driving rainstorm, just 2 or 3, 4 people, just a real scant attendance. And closed the tent meeting. Years later, he was walking downtown Birmingham, and a lady came up from behind him and stopped him and said, Brother Lewis, you don't remember who I am, but you taught me the truth in a driving rainstorm down in Childersburg. And she mentioned how many years ago. And sometimes you don't see the results immediately, but you just make sure you're doing right. You've got the right attitude toward God, and let the results, God will take care of the results. And that to me, that's comforting, to know maybe some good is, I pray God's blessings and good will come, and we trust that's the case. Comment, anybody? Okay, well, we've come down to the end of this section with verse 12. Everybody can quote this, I hope, and therefore, quote it with me, whatsoever ye would that men should do unto you, do ye also unto them, for this is the law and the prophets. We didn't answer our questions, did we? Look on page 55, real quickly, page 55 of your booklets. Number 6 on page 55, the words ask, seek, and knock indicate what kind of attitude should we have in prayer. Note Jesus' story in Luke 5. Luke 11, 5 through 13. Anybody on that? What do you have? Sister Jen?
Humility and persistence.
Yes, humility, persistence. In some of the older translations, the word importunity or importune, just that steadfast, consistent perseverance. To what family relation does Jesus refer to illustrate God will provide what is good to a what? Father, Son. While we may ask for something in prayer, God doesn't necessarily promise that thing, but what is what? What is good, the good things. What does this show us about some of our requests in prayer? James 4 verse 3, ye ask and receive not because you ask amiss. Yes. Sometimes we might not ask for the right things. And I'm going to redo that, as you probably can tell, because I structure those questions more just of seeking God in prayer. And I mentioned that in the topic. All right, so now we have a summary of God's moral law and the golden rule. If you look back up here at the chart with me for a moment, likely the best known words of Jesus, except for maybe 7:1, judge not that you be not judged, but yet they're very little practiced by those who know it. When we see the word therefore, see what it is there for. But therefore usually brings a summation. It brings a conclusion to what has gone before, or as a consequence, or introduces a conclusion. And so Jesus bases or grounds his instructions as to how to treat others in God's gracious treatment of us. The Father's gracious and generous treatment toward us is not what we deserve, but is what we need. And it's what is in our best interest. And I think it's interesting. If you'll notice, and I've got this on the next slide, I went ahead and did some reworking. The word therefore really closes the heart of the sermon with an appeal to selfless, sacrificial love for others, which reflects God's love for us, which is a thread that runs throughout. And if you notice where Luke places this statement, all right, here is in Matthew. This is, by the way, this is A.T. Robertson's Harmony. You go back to Matthew 5:44. Hate your enemy versus love your enemy. Salute your brethren only. And what compares favorably to this is Luke 6:27 through 30. But I say to you, love your enemies, do good to those that hate you, bless them that curse you, pray for them that despitefully use you. To him that smites thee on one cheek, offer the other. And from him who takes away your cloak, withhold not your coat also. Give to everyone that asks you, and of him that takes away your goods, ask not again. Now that passage, this part of the sermon, as parallel to Matthew 5, is where we've made the point, that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You don't retaliate in kind. You do, or as Paul said in Romans 12, be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Well, it's here. Verse 31 is not in this section of Robertson's chronology, because it actually fits in chapter 7 of Matthew. But this is where it goes. If someone takes away your goods, ask. And if you love them that love you, what thing have you, even sinners? And if you love those who love you, you're not doing anything great. If you love those who hate you, in essence, you're treating people the way they need to be treated, regardless of how they treat you. Regardless, you're doing the right. I've made the point before. It's like in football. The offense has the ball, and certain plays are designed to go. Regardless of what the defense you design. I know you take what the defense gives you. I understand that, but still, you're running with the ball. You're on the offensive. And it's almost like you got to have that attitude, regardless of what that person does. I've got the ball. I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to run with it. And so that's where we are. So, though many identify it as unique, Jesus describes it as the very heart of the law and the prophets. And as memorable as it is, it does not teach anything actually new morality, but restates Leviticus 19:18, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Loving your neighbor as yourself is tantamount to doing unto him as you would that men do unto you. You see the parallel there. However, there is an intensity that Jesus gives based on his love. That passage is where he says, a new commandment give I thee, that you'll love one another, even as I have loved you. A new commandment. It's not based new versus old. A new, in that passage, is from a Greek word kainos, which means new in kind, not new in respect to age. That's a different Greek, but it's new in kind, in nature, something you're not used to. And the degree to which the love is expressed, a new commandment give I thee, that you love one another even as I have. Well, how great was that? Well, to what extent did Jesus love? He gave his life. So,
You know, God doesn't require anything of us that he has not shown toward us or his son.
that's right. He hadn't shown toward us in what Jesus was willing to do. Good point, David. That's exactly right. So it makes us deal with others by beginning with ourselves. How we would want to be treated if we were in the same circumstances. If this is such a noble principle, you usually say, well, why don't more people practice it? Well, it's because they're selfish. It's a mind thing. It's a determination. I'm going to do this regardless. It's not like, I'll do this if I feel like it. No, we've determined ahead of time. I'm going to treat this person the right way. So when our attention is fixed on God and his desires for us, how he treats us, and we desire to be as he is in that character toward us, it drives out selfishness and love, and we'll love people as God loves us. Comment, question, anybody? We're going to have to go. Our time is shot. I wanted to make some applications from that, but we're out of time. So any last comment as we ring the bell? Anybody? Okay, thank you for your help. Lord willing, we'll pick up there tonight, or Wednesday night.